Greetings, class. I hope you guys are doing well. We're getting into our last branch of creative writing, which is so sad to me. Our class has gone so fast, but we're getting into fiction, and fiction is really my specialty. It's my background. It's what I've studied the most, and it's what I write the most. So I'll try to give you the best tips I can, and I'll try to help you guys with this writing and make you guys better writers to the best of my ability. Here's some tips I have for writing fiction, and that is characters matter in fiction. Like if you're telling a nonfiction story, you could write in first person. You may never get a grasp of, what that character looks like, maybe not even who they are, maybe the other characters in it. But fiction is more dependent on characters. It's very character-based, very character-centered. That's rule number one. Usually you have a main character, and we've talked about this with the climax, the story arc, but generally you have a main character, and you have a lot of forces that are working against that character. They're trying to get something they want, and either they get it or they don't. But it's all centered on characters. And so as you're writing the story, you'll want to think about characters. The best way to think about characters are people you know, people you think about. You could even use people from movies that might be that character type that you're looking for in your own story. But the best place to find characters is just to be aware of what's going on around you. You could write about yourself as a character as well, but it's just really opening up and trying to decide who your characters are going to be. And this week I'm going to work on some character sketches with you guys as well. So we'll work on developing characters together. Nonfiction isn't as dependent on this is rule number 2. Nonfiction is not as dependent on dialogue as fiction is. And I mean, there are some writers like, I can't remember the guy's name. He's a science fiction writer. But he rarely used dialogue. When he did, he had the worst dialogue ever. But I would say this. I would say one of the fine lines between nonfiction and fiction is more dependent on dialogue. Characters speak, they talk. And a lot of times the dialogue drives a story. Whenever I write, I love to write dialogue. I love it. So usually my first draft is I get the conversations down, and then I build around the conversations, and I let the conversations build the chapters or build the story. But if this is a longer course, it just sucks because we got an 8-week course. But if this was a longer course, I'd have you go out, listen to conversations. I think that's the best way to really understand dialogue is just listen to people. Listen how they talk. And when we generally write, we're used to writing so formally and academic that we're avoiding contractions and swear words and slang and all of these other things. But when you're writing dialogue for characters, you want to be true to the character. If the character swears a lot, then have the character swear. If they use a lot of slang or a certain dialect, you want to try to capture that. Mark Twain was one of the best at that. He would try to capture who people were. And that's essential to storytelling. I think we've talked about that. Not capturing people for who you want them to be, but for who they are. And listening to their conversations, listening to the dialogue. We read a story, Nameless Tennessee, that had such good dialogue, and it did exactly that. So I challenge you guys to start putting dialogue in these stories, the story we're going to write next. Have the characters talk, have them have exchanges, because a lot of times what people say says so much about who they are, or who they're not, and that's the psychology of it. For example, my character, they might say something, but they're thinking something completely different, and that just builds so many more dimensions to a story, and that's why I have a lot of fun with characters and seeing how the other characters react and everything. I love doing that. Rule number 3 is the arc that we were talking about in the past still applies. Something has to happen. It has to happen within a span of pages. You're still looking for that setting, the character development, the rising action, the climax, the resolution. That's true of fiction. I say fiction is more dependent on it than nonfiction. Nonfiction, you could write essays like we read with Joan Didion, like she wasn't doing arc stories, but fiction is all set upon arc and climax and things like that. Which brings me to my next point. Tension drives stories. It's all about tension. If you want to write a good story, have tension. And one thing I always say to myself whenever I write something is I don't want to make things easy on my characters. I don't want them to just find somebody and fall in love and that's it. I want them to go through hell in order to be with this person. I want them to face every challenge possible. I'm being a bit sarcastic right now, but it's true. I want them to have a hard time. And the harder I make it, the more tension there is. And the better read it is. I mean, you don't want to overdo it unless you're writing some type of crazy humor or something like that. But it's all about tension. Generally, it's good to have characters who don't get along, characters who don't go together. If you want to think about fiction, that's a fast way to do it. It's like instant fiction. Have a I don't know, a Holocaust survivor next to a neo-Nazi. I've written a story like that. I think that's why we see so many stories that have children and grandparents. There's a contrast there. There's a division there. They're so different, but they're so alike. But a fast way to write a fictional story is to just think about people who don't get along. And one person wants something, and either they're going to get it or they're not. That's a fast formula for fiction. Probably the fastest formula you can get. Let's see. Those are the main things I have right now. And I do have some activities I can do with you guys. It's not going to be discussions, but I'm going to show some things that I do to develop characters and things like that, and how to tell stories. And I'm going to have some readings for this week and next week that you can look at and analyze for stories. So I'm going to do everything I can. You guys wrote such good nonfiction stories. I was so moved. You guys are so talented. And so I know we don't have a lot of time, but we have enough time to write a damn good story. And I can't wait to see what you guys write for it.